welcome, podcast listeners. This is the Heartache Connoisseur podcast. We're going to continue today with my humble little story. Just a country psychiatrist out here in flyover country, everybody, doing the Lord's work. It's a little warmer today. I think it was 6 degrees when I ventured out to take my kids where they needed to go this morning. So, it's looking up. Well, anyway, yesterday I kind of laid out the first couple of decades of my life, an overview of those. And today I kind of want to start at around age 20 or so and take it about as far as it logically seems to want to go. So, late in my college career, I got married. I actually got married while I was still in college. I was 21 years old, and so was my bride at that time. We got married in Lawrence, Kansas, and lived there as a married couple for the last year of college. And then I was applying to medical school, and I got in, thankfully, over in Columbia, Missouri, at the University of Missouri. And so after college graduation, I headed over there with Janelle. And that was a young age to get married, at least in this day and age, I guess maybe you'd say. And certainly I don't think there's a lot of right or wrong on that. I may feel differently when my kids come home with their fiance at age 20. But I want to make it clear that I see all different things work. I see people marry their high school sweethearts, and they seem to stay in love for decades, and that's fabulous, and more power to them. And I see people that don't get married until they're 30 something, and that seems to work too. I think marriage at different phases of the lifespan comes with different challenges, and maybe those are self-evident. I think when you get married later, you've got some habits that are pretty ground into the dirt, and they may be harder to change, but maybe that's for the best. Maybe you're at a place where you can really accept more about who you are and how your partner is going to have their own habits. And when you get married young, like I did, I feel like that in many ways we grew up together. That a lot of our emotional development as 20-somethings and 30-somethings occurred side by side. And we, of course, pushed each other to grow in many ways. And so, I look back at that marriage and I don't see it as a mistake necessarily. I think people tend to think like, well, you're divorced, your marriage was a failure. Well, no, it wasn't, because it really changed me a great deal for the better. It certainly taught me many things about how to do a long-term relationship that I still, to this very day, use to my advantage and to my partner's benefit as well. Just there's a lot of rough edges that get ground off of you after that many years of marriage, and some of those skills translate into whatever relationship you're in. And so I don't regret that part of it at all. I certainly don't regret my wonderful 3 children. And my ex-wife is a great mother, and she's a good ex-wife, if that makes any sense. And we do all right and partnering together, and so that's a chapter that I've had to do a lot of emotional work to get past in terms of finding deep forgiveness for both myself and for her, and coming to terms with what it means to be a divorced person. And those were challenging areas for me to grow through, and I think I'm still growing through those to some degree. But I've spoken about this in previous podcasts, so I won't spend a ton of time on it, but I do want to make it very clear that you can you can have a marriage or any number of relationships early on in your life, and they don't have to be seen as mistakes. I think that that's a mistake to see them as mistakes. They're stepping stones. They're just a part of the path that you have to take, and they feel like detours, and they can feel like steep and rocky and dangerous parts of the journey, but that's okay. I mean, that's what makes the journey interesting too. So anyway, moving on, we went over to Columbia, Missouri. We were relative newlyweds at that time, and I was, I guess, 21 or so, 22, 21, when I started medical school, that's a young medical student. That's most medical students are that age, or many are older actually. That's the age you go in when you've done college in 4 years and you're going right in. And a lot of folks wait and go in later, but that's neither here nor there. But I guess it's relevant in that medical school and that type of education and that type of training, it's pretty tough, and I wasn't fully mature. I mean, who is, right? But I was young for that level of exposure to disease and death and trauma, and we all of us medical students are, and I don't want to sound like a victim, but there's some very real things to understand about what it means to become a physician. And one of them is that you sell your 20s to the gods of medicine. Those are gone. While everybody else is backpacking Europe and getting jobs after college and buying their first home and doing all that, it's like you're up all night doing rotations and taking call, and you're the low man on the totem pole. It's kind of militaristic almost in terms of the hierarchy and the pecking order, and the medical student is the lowest of the low. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the janitors told us medical students what to do. Like they were just, and it teaches you so much. It makes you humble. It can make you kind of angry, and I think sometimes that's why doctors come out kind of with an attitude. It's sort of like they feel like they've paid all these dues and now the world owes them obedience or something. But I'm generalizing here. But it was a very memorable time. I have very mixed feelings about it. It was an amazing accomplishment looking back. Like, I'm really glad I stuck it out and did that. It was brutal. It was super hard on my marriage. It was, it was painful. I mean, it was flat out painful, but very rewarding, at the same time. And it's like entering into this kind of, it's like entering into a very special fraternity in some ways. It's like only other doctors, it's like military guys that get together that have been through battle or something. It's like only other doctors know what you've been through. And not to make this sound so like we're so I don't mean that, because there's lots of professions out there and lots of lives that are very demanding. But it is part of my story, and it did shape me a great deal in telling me who I was. I let that degree tell me a lot about who I was, for better or for worse. And I'm still paying for it financially. I'm working in the field to this day. And the other thing that's sometimes people don't understand about medicine is that it's such an investment of time and money that once you're in it, it's very difficult to do something else, because you got to earn doctor money to pay it back in a reasonable amount of time. And you've got all this training, and there's a deep compulsion to kind of use that training. And so there are times where I'm like, was this the right thing to do? What would I do differently? Would I do anything differently? Would I, I love working in my wood shop, and I think, maybe I would have been happy making cabinets for a living, or being a trim carpenter, or, some kind of an artist, or whatever, and if I had 1,000 lifetimes, I'd probably try all those things out. But, you make do, and your decisions have consequences. And I wouldn't really do it differently, because I do love my work a great deal. And, my job as a psychiatrist has been, my goodness. I mean, it's I'm getting a little choked up. It's just changed me so much. And, I don't know that I could have gotten that type of an education any other way. The degree that it's allowed me to understand human suffering and what it takes to get healthy, and emotional pain and healing, and it's the very essence of life that's paraded before my eyes, whether I like it or not, on a daily basis, and it's shaped me for the good overall. And I remember debating heavily about whether or not to go into psychiatry. This is kind of an interesting story, maybe, but as I've mentioned, my father was a rural family doctor, a country doctor, and I'd had dreams of maybe going back home and practicing at some point. And I even entered my training with all throughout medical school. I was intending to go into family medicine, and I went into my residency training into a kind of a unique combined training program called it's where they train you in both family practice and psychiatry at the same time, and it's an extended residency, and you become board certified in both of those things. And so I did a year of that, and I did that at the University of Iowa after medical school. University of Iowa is where I came to do my residency training. And after a year of that, I decided to do just the psychiatry. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Back to the medical school days where I had to make that decision. You go through all these different rotations, and they expose you to a little bit of everything. And then at some point you have to decide what type of a residency training program you're going to go into. And I had a lot of internal conflict about that, because I had this life kind of planned out for myself as this family doctor, maybe a rural doctor, and kind of following in my dad's footsteps. And then I started to get exposed to the world of mental health in my training program. And I remember feeling, I was doing this ER rotation, and these people would come in, like these homeless people, and they'd be drunk and mentally ill, and it was kind of one of those patient populations that many people really don't like to deal with very much for some obvious reasons. But I gravitated towards that type of thing. I liked the fringe nature of those encounters, and I really empathized a great deal with disorders of the mind. Because, I mean, it's just so bizarre, and it was so intriguing to me. And it was kind of like the reading about psychiatry was sort of the one thing I could read for pleasure. Every other rotation I was on, I had to like choke it down. And it's like, okay, let me memorize everything there is to know about the freaking kidney as fast as I can and then forget it. But psychiatry was something that really drew me in. And as I got on to the floors where the units, we call them units, or the wards or whatever, where these psychiatric patients were in the hospital, usually for episodes of depression with thoughts of suicide, or episodes of bipolar disorder where somebody gets manic, or a schizophrenic has an exacerbation and starts to hear a lot of voices and gets paranoid, delusional, etc. I would be on those wards, and I just was really enjoying it a great deal. I remember sitting down and talking to these folks that were, I don't know. I mean, it's everything under the sun that you hear up there, and I certainly want to be sensitive to the disease process and how much human suffering goes into that. But it was fantastic to hear the nature of these illnesses described by the people experiencing them. And it made me think a lot about the deepest parts of the human soul and how we come to be what we are. And I was already kind of interested in songwriting and a musician and that sort of thing. And it kind of fit in with that in a way. It's kind of that internal self-exploration that you do in the field of psychiatry is sort of the same type of thing you do when you're writing a song in many ways, at least for me, my process. And so they really fit hand in hand. Now you got to fight through a few things because people think psychiatrists are weird, and we are. And there's some bias against psychiatry. You go through all this training and you learn how to use your stethoscope and your reflex hammer, and you learn how to read a chest x-ray, and you do all this doctor stuff, and then you become a psychiatrist and you essentially quit doing all that, and you just sit there and you talk to people, and you don't really lay hands on them so much, and it's a pretty big shift. It's a pretty big change in how you see yourself as a physician, but I came to understand that it was a very important profession and that there is a great deal of need for it. And so I was very satisfied in that way, and knowing that I was entering into a world where I was going to be able to do some good. And but then I had to face all this stuff with my father too. It's not like Dad was like, don't be a psychiatrist. But look, every young boy wants to please their father, young lady too, but I mean, especially me, it's like I idolized my dad. I wanted to be just like my dad, and to back away from family medicine and go into psychiatry was actually really a difficult thing for me. I had to set aside the desire I had to please my father in that moment and make a decision based on what I thought was best for me. And I was very much of two minds about it. And I think that's reflected in my decision to go into this combined training program. On some level, that was a hedge. It was kind of like, well, I'll just get trained in both. That way I can do either one. And it turned out that was I don't know. I just got onto those family medicine rotations, and it didn't feel nearly as alive to me as when I was doing psychiatry. And so I listened to my gut, and I walked right in and told the chair of the department that I wanted to switch over to straight psych. And that was a difficult conversation. And of course, he tries to convince you otherwise, and you have to stick to your guns while this, 60-year-old, venerable academic tries to tell you why you're wrong. But anyway, that whole time period caused me to face a lot of my own hang-ups about my identity, who I thought I was going to be, where I thought I was going. And I'm glad I did it. And during my medical school years too, I played in a band with some guys, a couple of them from back home in Rockport. They happened to be down at the University of Missouri doing their undergraduate training at the same time I was doing my medical school. So I hooked up with old Tyler Gebhards and Ryan Griffin, and I don't think they'll mind me naming names, but and when we met this other guy down there, Pete Situ, and he was a drummer. He came off that University of Missouri drum line, and he knew how to do every flamadiddle and periwinkle and paradiddle and flamma whatever. He did it all, and he was a fantastic drummer. And to this very day, he still plays and plays guitar and sings now, actually, in a band down around Springfield called the Pete and Dave Show, or Pete and Dave, something like that. But they're very good, so go check them out if you live down there. But those were great memories. That was my first experience with real recording. Ironically, the first full length album that I ever did in a serious recording studio was in Iowa, and I didn't live in Iowa at the time. I lived in Missouri, but there was a studio up in Cedar Falls, still is, I believe, called Catamount Recording Studio, and I got in the car with some of these guys and went up there and did some recording, and then we did another one there in Columbia, Missouri. The band name was called the Little Achievers. which was kind of a takeoff on the Big Lebowski, little urban achievers or whatever. We were big fans of that movie at the time, still am. But so anyway, that was kind of that. And then marriage was tough because I was still wanting to play in bars and, and do that whole thing and try to go to medical school and behave like a 20, 21, 22-year-old. And that was pretty incompatible with being a solid husband. And so that created some conflict, and we worked through a fair amount of that. And ultimately we moved up to Iowa City, where I still am to this day. And we started my residency training program and finished that in 2006 and started private practice after that. But residency training was eye-opening, and that'll whip you right into shape. That's a grown-up world there. They work you hard. Psychiatry is not as bad as many medical specialties. The surgical specialties are known for how rough they can be, and some of the internal medicine specialties as well are also known for that. But anyway, now it's hard for everybody because you're at the front edge of this very steep learning curve, and suddenly people are calling you doctor, but you don't really know what you're doing, and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and you're inefficient, and it's also humbling and the beginning of a like I say, a very steep learning curve. And it takes a while to get high enough up on that to feel competent and confident in what you're doing, and then begin to really enjoy the work. So that was my experience of that. And I think I want to always tie in faith a little bit. And when I left undergrad and came over here to medical school, I would say that was probably some of the farthest I felt from faith for quite some time. I mean, I was totally immersed in studies and kind of doing some partying still, and still playing in a band, and I just wasn't interested. I'd sort of, meander over to church every once in a while when I wasn't, sleeping one off or whatever, and we kind of tried to keep it part of our lives, but it was nominal at best. And I tell that just to kind of reassure people too that you go through these phases of life where it's really hard to hold on to the depths of your faith. And the good news is that God holds on to you, and it was never really up to you in the first place. And He takes all those experiences. I remember a very poignant moment when I came up to Iowa, and we found this church, and we went to this church because we opened up the Yellow Pages, and the ad for this church was, yes, we actually had a Yellow Pages at that time that we used, and the ad said, strong coffee, rock and roll, and Jesus. And we're like, well, that sounds like where we'd like to go to church. So we went there, and it wasn't long after we went there that I began to play in the worship band. And I started out, one of the things I played early on was bass guitar. They needed a bass, and if you play guitar, it's not that difficult to kind of shift over into bass. And I was sitting there playing on a Sunday morning, just like kind of coming out of this whole medical school fog, and trying to establish myself in this new town and meet people, and with these strangers on this stage, and I'm playing bass guitar, and it felt like God said to me, He's like, I'm not going to waste any of that. I'm not going to waste any of those years that you learned how to play in a rock band, and you learned how to stand up in front of people and engage a room in front of a microphone and control the dynamics of a band. I'm going to use all that. I'm going to use that, and we're going to put you to work up here on this stage, and you're gonna rock out for me for a while. And I was like really moved by that He didn't see those days playing in a bar band as a waste, but rather as a training period. And I think that's what a lot of those hard times can be, is that they're just training periods for something else. You go through something harder, and it allows you to hold more responsibility in the future. So, well, that seems like a pretty good place to stop. And I just want to kind of, maybe tie up that whole kind of discussion about, being of two minds about family practice and psychiatry, and just highlight again that how normal of a process that is for people, and that it is completely and utterly common and normal to really be torn sometimes between two things. And it doesn't mean you're wrong or you're missing it or you're not seeing the big picture. It's just normal to have a lot of things tugging at you and not always know the exact right path to take. And I think it's important in those moments to really take your time and delay decision making and follow your instincts too sometimes, and see if you can find out which of your decisions feel more like a call as opposed to pragmatic. I think you're always better off following the call, and you're going to have many opportunities throughout the course of your life where you're going to be faced with the opportunity to answer something higher, and say yes to every single one of those you can, because that's what takes you to the most full and complete life that there is available to us. And well, I got 5 minutes to get over to the office and start up with the patient here, so I might have to post this one a little bit later today whenever I get a chance to work on it. But thanks again for listening. I'd really appreciate you checking out my Patreon page and maybe considering a little small donation there. You can donate such a small amount. It's ridiculous if you want. You'll never even notice. It's like buying gumballs. But, head on over there. TheHeartacheConnoisseur.com has a link to my Patreon page if you want to check that out. I'd greatly appreciate it. And tune in. Next time, I'm going to kind of keep going with the story and kind of move through, well, it looks like I'm about up to here to the childbearing years and what it's like to have young children, be in your 30s, and try to go through residency and start a medical practice and try to hold a marriage together. So get ready for that one tomorrow. So, hey, have a great day. Thanks for listening.